The following discussion and materials are to be used for informational and training purposes only. They are not intended to supplant the requirements of the Assessor's Reference Library, the Colorado Constitution and statutes, and relevant court case law. You should consult and rely upon appropriate legal authority. Welcome to the Colorado Division of Property Taxation's video library. We hope you gain useful information and enjoy our presentation of this course.
Welcome everyone to APR 510 Sales Confirmation Workshop presented by the Colorado Division of Property Taxation. This is all kind of overview stuff before we really get into the material. So what kind of resources are out there for sales confirmation? The Assessor's Reference Library, Volume 3, Chapter 3 is everything sales confirmation. You'll notice a lot of the course content is mirrored in there somewhere in ARL Volume 3, Chapter 3. Obviously your course materials are going to be great reference for you. There's a lot of review from procedures and principles, and those classes may have some supplemental stuff that's not in this material that will help you understand what were those elements of comparison or whatever it may be that you're refreshing on. Obviously, the DPT staff and our website, I will say, we are not a source for sales data, but if you want help with the process or how you're confirming sales, maybe you have a weird outlier, can I qualify it, can I not, should I leave it out, those kind of questions, we can help you out with that. But again, we don't really get any data, so we don't really have any data to share, other than time trending data, which I don't deal with, but we obviously don't share that outside of the county that provides it. And then other information from IAAO, AI, Appraisal Foundation. This is the IAAO publication. They don't put numbers on their standards, but this is the standard on verification and adjustment of sales. And you'll notice a lot of what's in here. This is free. You can go on to IAAO's website and find this. A lot of what's in here is also in your course material. This is maybe a little bit more straight to the point. So it's a good thing to print out. I keep this on my desk all the time for when a question comes up and I want to just get a quick reference. This is great. And I can share that with you guys if you have any trouble finding it, you want a copy of it, I can email you a PDF version of it. I have that. So what's going on in our markets? What other kind of resources are out there? This is the Colorado Association of Realtors website down here. I have it hyperlinked. I'm not going to go into that website, but it's a great resource for information in some cases. General market data is what I would use it for, and I'll show you that here. So this is a snapshot of the last 10 years statewide in Colorado. This is sold listings, so the volume of sales, the number of sales. And in these red lines, I have the statutory base period. So July 1st through June 30th, well, January 1st of 2017 through June 30th of 2018 is the statutory base period. And we all know we can go back in 6-month increments, so I did that here. And what I wanted to show you guys, this really illustrates visually that volume of sales. So if we add those 6 months in, if we go back another 6 months to a full 2-year cycle, we are getting a bulk of the sales data here. You see, this is the volume of sales. There's a lot of sales happening in May, June, July. We want to capture that, all of that volume. If you don't need to go back 6 months, you don't do it. But you are allowed by statute to go back as far as 5 years, and you all know that. We'll talk about that again. In this case, statewide, we wouldn't need to do that. A lot of counties, there's so much data that they don't need to do that. But some counties are going back 3 years for commercial, maybe 5 years for just for res, because they just don't have that much activity going on. And then another indicator here is median sales price. And you can see the trend in the last 10 years is upward. So after the Great Recession, things kind of hit a low. And so, you know, they may have been up a little higher back here, but you see this steady growth happening. And, you know, kind of speaks or illustrates a time trend, right? We see over the course of the base period, we're going up. Values should be doing the same. And this is statewide. Not all counties fit that mold. Okay, so what about in your county? Your base period, I have a question mark for where it starts. Statutorily, it started January 1st of 2017. for this most recent reappraisal. But again, that may have gone back 5 years, and you may have started in July of 2014, I guess, 2013 that would be, for certain types of properties or generally for your market, depending on what kind of activity you have. Questions to ask: what are your market trends, market areas as things get developed? Economic area might be growing in size. Another economic area might be shrinking in size. Sales listings: what's your volume? Are they up, imbalance, down? Obviously, we don't have a lot of foreclosures, short sales, or REO sales at this point, but it's something we will talk about in the class, and they do still occur, even in a hot market. Are your marketing times, days on market, increasing, decreasing? Sales prices, up or down? And financing terms, are you seeing creative things in some of your developments, or is it all pretty conventional? Those are the kind of questions you want to ask as an appraiser and get familiar with your market. So I put a snapshot of a few, and I'm sorry, I'm not picking on anybody here. Generally, you can see the trend. Denver is above the state, and then we have Las Animas. And one of the things that this really illustrated to me, first of all, I will say they have terrible sales data for Las Animas, and you'll see that in the next slide. Jody has much better data than these guys have. But it kind of, to me, illustrates that whole residential, commercial, or residential assessment rate split, that ratio that we try to maintain in the state. And when you see the statewide way up here, a county like Las Animas isn't seeing that kind of growth that the state's seeing. And look what counties are throwing it off. These front range counties like Denver, Boulder, Jefferson. It almost illustrates it to me that, you know, that assessment rate is kind of unfair for Las Animas, and it may be fair for Denver, and it may be fair statewide based on the statute and everything that goes into that. But some counties are really suffering because of that sales ratio, or the residential assessment rate. Denver's up 26%. Statewide, we're up 20%. And I didn't do that for Las Animas because, as you'll see, they had 44 sales in this 2-year period analysis from RE Colorado, or the Colorado Association of Realtors. And I checked on Las Animas website, and I think there were over 1,000 sales. There were a lot of sales. So they obviously don't have the data that you all get, which is good for you. You guys are getting the best, cleanest data. The other thing about the median sales price that these guys put out, they don't adjust for anything that's non-realty. We do that in the assessor's office, and you guys are gonna see some of that. And hopefully, if you have any questions after what's presented today on those adjustments and how to get to just the real property value only, those are the kind of things that you can lean on us at the DPT, other counties, for that kind of information. All right, so on your outline for the course, I have AM topics up there. I don't know, we might get through this a little faster. Pace is going to be new as the course has been kind of revised. Why do we confirm sales? So what do we get out of them, and generally, why do we do it? How do we discover and collect that sales data? And then how do we verify that and make sure we're getting good data and putting good data into our CAMA system? You have 3 required transaction lists. Most of you all already probably know what those are. We'll talk about those, analyzing your data. We'll look at some indicators of where a sale might not be a good sale. And when I say good sale, bad sale, I'll use those terms a lot. Good sale, you know, those are those verified sales that we know are a good indicator of market value, sold on the open market, arm's length transactions. And so in section 6 there, we'll look at sales that you might need to scrutinize a little more, or maybe you can just unqualify it. Stratification of sales, adjustment to sales prices. We'll look at sales ratio analysis briefly. Section 10 deals with special issues regarding sales confirmation, and then a sales confirmation summary. So why do we confirm sales? Well, generally, this is a primary task for your reappraisal. How can we know that we have good sales data if we haven't confirmed those sales? Good sales data is going to reflect what the market's doing. And if we put quality data into our CAMA system, assuming your modeling and everything went well, you should be getting accurate actual values. You'll also have more confidence in defending those values. And sales confirmation, it applies to all property types, all classes. And you'll see in that bullet point, what about producing mines, oil and gas, and ag properties? How does sales confirmation apply to them? And we know with residential property, we are bound to the market approach. And so sales confirmation is the first step in being able to do any kind of market analysis and come to a value. But what about those producing mines, oil and gas? Anybody know what we do with those? Do we look at sales of those types of properties? You might see a property like that sell, but when we value them at the assessor's office, statute gives us guidance. It says this is how you value these types of properties. Ag's no different. We value ag property based on its productive capacity, just like oil and gas producing mines. But what's a little different about ag? The values do not mirror market values. Okay, the assessment rate stays at that 29% for everything, essentially almost everything that's not res. With ag properties, we obviously can't use them in ratio studies because they sell on the open market, and then we value them based on their earning capacity. So can an ag sale help us in any way? I mean, if we get an ag sale and we are valuing ag properties, do we use that sale to value those ag properties at all?
No.
We don't. You can't use it for that. But is there a circumstance where you could use it? Say I have two 400-acre parcels next to each other. They both have water rights. One sells on the open market, $4 million sale. Well, the new owner says, I'm coming out of ag. I don't want that cow mess all over by my house. I'm coming out of ag. That's a perfect indicator now of the market value of that piece of land and whatever improvements and water rights may be attached. And so the neighboring property, we say, okay, you're still doing ag. You still get valued based on that earning capacity of the land. The other guy's coming out of ag, okay, you're going to get valued at market. And now we have a good valid indicator of what market is, assuming we've vetted that sale. So this can actually come in handy with ag properties that change hands. And of course, as appraisers, you need to be competent in your market. We have a jurisdictional exception for competency. So if I'm thrust into appraising commercial property for a county in Colorado, I can do that without being competent, and I haven't violated USPAP. But don't you think it would help? Yeah. So confirming sales, it's like putting your finger on the pulse. You're finding out, what is the market telling me? What's the heartbeat? And the underlying principle here is qualify as many sales as you can, but exclude those bad sales. Get the bad sales out of your analysis. And how do we do that? Well, we've vetted them, and we have good reason to say this sale is not an indicator of market value for whatever reason it may be. Okay, and that's what we're going to explore today. Thorough vetting of sales allows for verification of the physical characteristics of the property, terms and conditions of the sale. You're going to have accurate CAMA data. Okay, so you may have a historic record for a property. It sells. Do we just assume that our CAMA system's right? No, we go inspect that property with our field sheet. We say, we're pretty close, but they've done a remodel or whatever it may be. Something's changed. Now we can update that information in our CAMA system. And again, you'll gain a better understanding of your market. All right, so another reason we confirm sales is because the law says we have to. Market approach, it's the sole approach for residential real property. Accurate sales information is vital to obtain accurate values, right? If we put garbage in, or if we just leave garbage in, then we're going to get garbage out. The market approach requires a representative body of sales sufficient to set a pattern. What is that body of sales? Anybody have a number in mind?
At least 30.
Okay, 30 sales. It also says 5%. And that's based on the class, subclass of property. This is to include sales by a lender or government, and you'll see this again. That's in statute and in the Constitution. This statute says we have to give due consideration of the degree of comparability. We can't just look at 1,000 sales, come to a median price per square foot, and then value everything based on that. It has to be reasonable, apples to apples. We're accounting for those differences and the similarities of the properties. And if you guys look on page A2, I've done a little bit of highlighting. You see all sales shall be included in the sample that reasonably reflect a true or typical sales price during the specified period specified in section 39.1.104. That statute sets the base period. Just below that, you see sales of personal property exempt pursuant to provisions of a lot of statutes shall not be included in any such sample. So we all have, I mean, if you've done any sales confirmation, you know, we try to remove any personal property, right? And that's the first time we see, you know, personal property, we got to take that out. We'll see that again in other statutes. Because of the unique characteristics and limited number of oil shale mineral interests, a minimum of 5 arm's length sales, that base period, 18 months prior to July 1st, it advances 2 years over the previous. So every 2 years it advances 2 years. And that's what that statute says. As we know, we can extend that 18-month period. And then at the bottom, paren B, still on page A2, each sale included in the sample shall be coded and indicated a typical negotiated sale, screened and verified by the assessor. Okay? So, and we'll talk about that. So statute says this thing has to have been screened and verified, and we'll see where we may not get that far. Over on 39.1.103, paren 8F, you see it says include only those sales which have been determined on an individual basis to reflect the selling price of the real property only. And when you read these statutes, you have to look at the entirety of the statute, but they say real property only in here twice. So now again, we're expanding, not only are we deducting for personal property, but any non-realty item. So let's define real estate versus real property. Real estate is the physical parcel of land, improvements to the land, improvements attached to the land, and all other appurtenances. So your roads, your sewers, your pipeline, any type of utility work, houses, wells, all that stuff is in there. Real property, on the other hand, that refers to the interests, benefits, and rights inherent in the ownership of real estate. And we call that the bundle of rights. And this is review for a lot of you. We may get back to this later on in the course, towards the end if we have time. But just to keep it clear, real estate, real property, two different things. A lot of times those terms are used interchangeably, but as appraisers, knowledgeable appraisers in your office, you're going to know the difference between real estate and real property. All right, so back to statute. Minimum requirement for sample size in order to conduct ratio studies. Okay, so the statute says that you need to have 30 sales or 5% to conduct a ratio study. It does not say that you need to have 30 sales or 5% of a class or subclass to set value. And we may get to a court case where the courts ruled that volume of 30 sales is not required to set value. The statute says it's required for ratio studies. So in that court case, they let a smaller sample of sales qualify as a market. And again, the sales must be verified by the assessor as typical sales. So we're seeing kind of a lot of repetition through some of these statutes. We've got to make sure, you know, we're looking at real property only, where they're verified. Okay, what are the 4 basic responsibilities of the assessor? You guys have a little fill in the blank at the bottom of A3. Anybody know what those 4 basic responsibilities are? Yes, sir.
Discover, list, classify, and value.
Discover, list, classify, value. Good. All right, the assessor is required to gather sales derived from deeds recorded with the clerk and recorder. So I stopped by the Denver County office and went to the clerk and recorder, and this was the sales from July through December so far. That's a joke. They have a lot of sales volume. And I don't know what that process looks like in your guys' county. In Gunnison County, folks would come in, record their deed, submit their TD 1000. The clerk and recorder would stamp it, put it in a basket, and once a week, our technicians, our transfer techs would go over there, pick up the stack, come back and transfer properties. Statute says the clerk and recorder must deliver, or however that works in your county, hopefully it works. You see that data gathering period, January 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2018. We call that the base period. As we know, we can go back further in time, 6-month increments, to achieve an adequate number of comps. So when we're setting value, we need an adequate number. When we're looking at ratio studies, then we have to conform to that 30 sales or 5% for each subclass class. Can go back 5 years. Hopefully you're not having to do that in your counties. I know some you might be, depending on the type of property. The appraisal date, June 30th of 2018. That's for this current reappraisal. This is the date that we will time trend any of those older sales to. So in our current market, we go back to the first couple of slides and you saw the statewide 10-year median sales price climbing and climbing and climbing. We need to make those, if we are going back 2 years, that 2-year-old sale needs to look like it occurred on June 30th of 2018. If it happened July 1st of 2016, we still might use it in our analysis, but we know things have changed in our market. Currently, we're seeing an increasing market. If you were seeing a decreasing market, it would work the exact same. You would just decrease the values accordingly. And time trending, if you guys, if your office is struggling with it, the DPT does offer assistance with that. And you can contact Ken Beezer, and usually every 2 years during the reappraisal, Ken gets, a handful to 20 counties might ask him for assistance. So we need a sufficient sales sample for market analysis, statistical analysis, defense of our values, and applying appropriate adjustments. All right, so where do we get all this data from? Oh, sorry, we're still on A4. At the bottom there, we screen sales so that we know the prices reflect the consideration for the real property only. Sales must have occurred during the correct time period. And sales that are excluded must have good cause. Okay, when the auditor comes in and says, this sale looks like it falls in, or maybe it's outside of your range of values, but they're gonna ask, justify, why did you not include this sale in your analysis? All right, now we're on to sources. So we get real estate transfer documents. This could include your deeds, land contracts, and that real property transfer declaration, or the TD1000. I don't know why, but I think R2D2 when I think TD1000. Closing statements. What do you guys not get in the assessor's office? You don't get a look at a sales contract typically, right? And we'll talk about that. Buyers and sellers, your market participants, this is gonna be probably your best source, assuming people are being honest. Those in-person interviews are gonna be the best. We'll talk kind of about the differences here. Telephone interviews and sales questionnaires. And we'll get into a little more detail on all of this stuff, just an overview here. And then you have your third-party sources like your MLS, real estate agency staff, brokers, agents, appraisers, other appraisers from other counties, fee appraisers that work within your county, and then appraisal organizations, attorneys, title companies, the internet. So we have a lot of sources for sales data, and we have a lot of sources to kind of cross-reference the accuracy of the sales data that we have. All right, so what is a sales contract? Sales contract is an agreement to purchase property. A contract does not transfer title to real property. Therefore, the contracted sales information is not placed in the master list, but it may be used in a separate analysis as a possible indicator of value. So we're thinking Platinum Properties. That was a court case, and that court case said that if a sale was contracted within the base period and then subsequently closed after the base period, you at the assessor's office might see a sale data of July 4th. But the contract was actually drawn up and signed and agreed upon by both parties back in June within the base period. Well, you can't use that in your analysis because you didn't even know about it until after the fact, but you may have to consider those sales in additional hearings at, say, the CBOE or the BAA. Those sales will come into play. And Platinum Properties, we have some court cases at the back of your material. We may look at that case today. If not, you have it for a reference. But Platinum Properties was the court case that said, if it was contracted within the base period, you probably still will have to consider that if somebody pushes the issue. And contracts may contain contingencies. They're actually quite common. A mortgage contingency, that means I want to buy your house, but until the bank says, yeah, we'll loan money to this guy, then that might be a contingency in the contract. Inspection, I have my building inspector go through the building, finds out the foundation is not sound. That might cancel my contract, okay? I have a contingency in there. A sale, so I own one property, I'm trying to upsize or downsize, and me purchasing your property is dependent on me selling the one that I own, because I don't have just tons of money, right? So there might be a sale contingency, and then of course appraisal contingency. I contract to buy your house for $600,000. The appraiser comes back and says it's worth $5. Do I want to spend an extra $100,000? No. What if the appraisal comes back and says it's worth $7? You don't want to lose that $100,000. So you might cancel a contract based on how the appraisal comes back. So the deed is the legal instrument that conveys ownership in real property. And we'll go through some different deed types. I've kind of given just a general introduction to them. If you're not familiar with them, there is a little bit more information in the back of the book. But hopefully you'll get enough, you'll get what you need to know about these deed types. The biggest difference is in the warranty or the guarantee of title protection in that deed. And so you'll see with the general warranty deed, and we have that underlined and bolded, the general warranty deed conveys the most secure title that can be received. So the grantor, the person deeding you the property, is saying, I own this and there is no defect, there is no problem with the chain of title. Nobody will come to you and say that they own part of it or all of it. And if they do, I will defend it. So the elements of a deed, this is what's required in a deed to actually make this thing work, to make it transfer property. The document has been recorded. You see that at the very top. There is a grantor, a grantee, and a date upon which this deed is happening. The consideration, what does that mean? They thought about it? No. What is consideration? How much? Yeah. What dollar amount are we putting on this? And you even see that under consideration, blank dollars. The words of conveyance, granting clause, description of property and any reservations. The written instrument, habendum clause, if there's any exceptions or restrictions on what is being transferred. Warranties and covenants. And then of course the grantor's signature. When the grantor signs that thing, title's transferred. Okay, it doesn't need to be recorded. We do record them in Colorado. That's declaring to the world that I now own this. And then the acknowledgement of the grantor's signature. So that is your notary signature and stamp saying, yes, this grantor did sign this on this day and I attest to that. Okay, so more of a reference. We will look at actual deeds here shortly. But first, let's kind of talk about these different deed types. So the warranty or guarantee, that's kind of the biggest thing on that deed. And then there's another kind of feature. Some deeds will transfer after acquired title. That means that I can transfer property that I don't yet own to another party. And then as soon as I would do that, knowing that maybe my uncle passed and he has willed this to me, but that personal representative is a slacker and it takes a while to get all that paperwork done and get me my deed. So I don't have the property yet. I'm leaving town and I don't want to deal with this property. It's like a yak farm down in Montezuma County. I don't want to go down there. I don't want to deal with it. So I'm going to sell it to Jody. Jody's a willing buyer. She gives me the consideration and I give her this deed that transfers after acquired title. Then as soon as the personal representative's deed gets recorded, title automatically transfers to her. It never becomes my property. That's the concept of transferring after acquired title. And more importantly for you all in sales confirmation, some deed types will rule out an arm's length transaction. So you see this type of deed, and we talked about one already. You see that deed, you know that's not going into your analysis. And so I put this funny little clip up. Think about it for a sec, Ted. Why would somebody put a guarantee on a box? Very interesting. You figure they put that box under your pillow at night, the guarantee fairy might come by and leave a quarter. Am I right, Ted? Chris Farley's much better than me. So why put warranty on there? Why do I want a deed that gives warranty? I know what I'm getting, right? I know somebody's not going to come 2 years down the road and say, wait a second, you paid for this, right? You bought it, and that's all done, but you don't actually own it. I own it, and here's this little instrument that says I do. Okay, if you have warranty in your deed, then you have protection against that happening. Deeds that contain warranty. It's in the name. General warranty deed, special warranty deed. Always, they're going to contain warranty. Now, what's the difference? Let's look on page A6. The grantor in a general warranty deed warrants title against all defects. Does not warrant against encumbrances arising from the Grantee's Own Act. So I've now I've deeded you this property. Something happens that you do, I can't help you there. But nobody before my ownership is going to come and say I own part of it or all of it. Whereas a special warranty deed, the grantor warrants only against defects arising after they've acquired the property. Okay, so this is common for developers. I take a 40-acre piece, subdivide it into a bunch of pieces that never existed before. I'm not going to warranty against something that I don't even know existed, right? So you'll see those special warranty deeds a lot with new development. The bargain and sale deed may contain warranty. It's not an automatic that it doesn't. And so that's where all those fun little words in the written instrument portion of your elements of a deed, you have to read all those little words. And in a bargain and sale deed, there may be warranty contained in that deed. And then sales that definitely do not contain warranty are the quitclaim deed. Transfers after acquired title, both general and special warranty deed and the bargain and sale deed. Doesn't transfer after acquired title would be that quitclaim deed, the race to the courthouse. So I quitclaim both of you my property. The first one who goes and gets it recorded, you're the one who gets the property. Other deed types, personal representative's deed. In this case, there may be a good market value here. You have to analyze that transaction and determine, was a fair market value established before the transaction. And then deed types, public trustee's deed we talked about, sheriff's deed, treasurer's deed. We talked about a treasurer's deed, not the public trustee's deed. These will not be arm's length transactions, okay? So you see that come through, you value it, you transfer ownership, assuming everything else is copacetic, but you know that we're not going to use this in our analysis. All right, so that real property transfer declaration, sometimes it's referred to as the RPTD. Typically, we just call that the TD1000. That's the most common usage. The TD1000 must accompany all deeds subject to a dock fee. Okay, so what deeds are subject to a dock fee? We have an addendum. It's the second to the last page in your material. You don't have to flip there now. But it shows you the statutorily exempted deeds that do not have to pay a dock fee. And if they're not subject to a dock fee, we don't get a TD1000, it's not a sale we analyze. Here's your blank TD1000. Get familiar with the document itself. And it's stapled. The second page is going to be the instructions on how to fill out a TD1000. Those instructions are not for you guys in the assessor's office of how to understand this thing. Those instructions are for the real estate agent or the underwriter, whoever is helping the buyer fill this thing out. That's what those instructions are for. We've recently revised this TD1000, so those of you who have been doing sales confirmation for a while, you'll recognize a few differences, and I will go over them now, make note of it. The very top paragraph we've bolded. This document is not recorded, is kept confidential, and is not available for public inspection. Okay, there was a lot of concern. People didn't give good, accurate information on these to the assessors because they thought that anybody could come and look at it, like a recorded deed. Those are public record. Okay, the TD1000 is specifically confidential. The declaration on the second paragraph you see in bold. We bolded and underlined because we have to make it very clear what we're trying to get across here. This declaration must be completed and signed by either the grantor or grantee, okay? It goes on, the statute talks about who can look at the document. The grantor can only look at the document if they were the ones that submitted it. The grantee can look at it regardless of who submitted it. The third paragraph, you see the penalty for not filing. I know this goes unenforced a lot of times. Some counties choose to enforce that penalty. It's kind of a PR thing. Down to number 5, we broke out the personal property. It used to be one line and describe. Now you see it's itemized, description of the item, and then the approximate value of the item. And then finally, a personal property total. And you'll notice here we say, list any personal property included in the transaction that materially impacts the total sale price. One of the kind of gray areas we get into is appliances, kitchen appliances. And you'll see on a TD1000 where they've put $1,000 down for an appliance package, refrigerator, range, and dishwasher. Do you always adjust that? Take that out of the sale price? I see some heads shaking no. When would you not adjust for it? I'm going to read through this. Number 5, personal property may include, but is not limited to, machinery or equipment, vehicles, exceptional appliances. We added that word exceptional in there. Electronic devices, furniture, or anything that would not typically transfer with the real property. Anything that would not typically transfer. So you're in a cookie cutter subdivision, $300,000 homes. They all sell with a pretty standard stainless steel, decent appliance package. And then you have the one with the Wolf appliance package. It's $15,000. That one you might adjust. Okay, everybody else gets a standard. We don't adjust. If it's atypical, that's what you're looking for. This used to say draperies, rugs, all this stuff. And people would say, oh yeah, there's carpet down, and to put new carpet down, it'd be about $2,000. So why don't you adjust $2,000 off of that sale price? And I say, well, is carpet or flooring typical in your market? You don't need to adjust for that. If every house sells with flooring, then probably don't adjust for it. Now, if we're talking some kind of marble, extravagant, massive tiles that they put down or something that's just totally out of the ordinary, you might. Probably not. I mean, once it's affixed to the property, it becomes real property, right? Things that are easily movable personal property won't damage the property by taking it out. Okay, that's the kind of stuff you're looking for. And again, is it typical or atypical? At the bottom is this transaction between related parties. We had to kind of draw that out. People didn't know what related parties meant. Obviously, if you're my brother, we're related parties. This includes persons connected by blood or marriage, or business affiliates, or those generally acquainted prior to the transaction. So we're at a bar, we get to talking because I overhear you saying you got something to sell. Have we been acquainted prior to the transaction? Yes. So now I have to answer yes on that question. Does that make it an invalid sale? Not necessarily. Type of financing, total amount financed. This is, to me, the part where people lost interest in the TD1000, and I looked at a lot of these TD1000 documents, and I did not see a lot of them with financing information. People feel like that's personal. Why do I need to know that? The 16, 17, and 18 for properties other than res, the business or franchise fee, installment land contract, and then if it's vacant land, was an on-site inspection conducted. Oftentimes, we see this for residential property, but it does work for all types of property. And that's one of the nice things about the TD1000 is it gets filed with all deeds that are subject to a doc fee. And the nice thing is it's one form for the entire state that can cover every type of property. Now, when we get into some of those other types of property, vacant land, commercial, this TD1000 is not going to give us all the information we need. But as soon as we see that box checked, we know, print out a commercial questionnaire, we're sending that out. Again, there's a signature line for the grantee and for the grantor. They don't both need to sign this. It's just whoever filled it out. By putting those two lines there, we created some confusion. Do they both need to sign it? No, but what was happening when it was just one line is they weren't indicating, is it the grantor or the grantee that's signing it? And that's important. And then the last one, the mailing address. And we say at the beginning, we want your physical address. We had to put in there, do not use P.O. boxes. Here's where you might see a P.O. box number in that mailing address. And this is for any future correspondence, tax bills, property valuations. The assessor must send notice if no TD1000. And penalties apply when no TD1000 or incomplete. Again, the pertinent statutes and they're listed on the kind of the introduction to the document. 3913-102, 3914-102, 39.5, 121.5. Those directly speak to the TD1000 document. With the TD1000, we may need to send out supplemental confirmation letters. This is to request information that is not provided or included on the TD1000. There is a line at the end of the TD1000 that doesn't have a number, and it just says, please include anything else about this transaction that you may feel impacted the price. Barely ever is that filled out, or does it have anything in it. If it does, it may indicate that, okay, I have an answer to a question that wasn't included on the TD1000 and I don't need to send out a supplemental questionnaire. Or maybe it sparks another question in your mind, and then you say, okay, that information provided, I am going to send another questionnaire. Send when the TD1000 and doc fee have conflicting information. Okay, so the doc fee says consideration's $900,000. Buyer puts $800,000 on the TD1000. We need to get to the bottom of that. Anytime it's an apartment building, new subdivision properties, because the developer may be giving incentives or special financing to try to sell out that subdivision. And then, of course, with commercial and industrial property, a lot of information that just a TD1000 and that sales information is not going to give us. Addendum 3C, that's going to be a questionnaire, an example questionnaire. So if you go to ARL Volume 3, Chapter 3, Addendum 3C, you can see an example questionnaire that you might send to a commercial property. Finally, most importantly, sales without a TD1000 should remain qualified until you have a valid reason for them to be unqualified. So, and I've seen it where I get the deed, we transfer property because the deed transfers property, but we never got a TD1000. Usually the recorder would have caught that and they would say, you know, you need to put a TD1000 with this. Sometimes it would get through without that TD1000. And like, if I don't know why I can unqualify it, I can't just unqualify it because I don't have that TD1000. Does that make sense? Pretty straightforward. And that kind of speaks to, generally, we cannot unqualify a sale until we know that we can unqualify a sale. That'll be a theme in here. Information that is required. Date of sale. Notice it says not date of recording. So if I go back to the deed, the warranty deed that we have, we see a recording date of 2/22/2019. Sale date was 2/18 of 2019. Okay? Recording date does not establish the transaction. It's the date the deed was actually signed by the grantor. Instrument number, type of deed, the legal description of the property, grantor and grantee, full consideration, that's that doc fee price, any deed restrictions. But additional information important to sales analysis may include, but is not limited to, and so did you consider personal property? Interest transferred, was it a partial interest or was it 100% interest? Are they related parties? You see, there's a lot of this stuff kind of gets redundant. We have a lot of repetition, cover our bases. Marketing time, okay, if it was really short or really long, is that typical? What did it have fair market exposure? I know that to consider a sale arm's length in Denver County for the last 2 years, there have been times where market exposure of a day is acceptable, and that seems really short to me. But if that's the market and the majority of homes sell within a week, then that could be a valid sale. It could, as long as it was exposed to willing buyers, you can potentially throw that in there. And that's a judgment call, okay? That's a judgment call that you have to make based on your market. The marketing method. So you see some examples for sale by owner, auction, internet marketing, newspaper, sealed bids, word of mouth. Some of those are maybe not the traditional way that we think of a house being marketed and listed on the MLS, for sale sign in the front. That doesn't always mean that that method wasn't a good method to expose it to all potential buyers. So like a classified ad or a Craigslist ad, that might constitute a fair marketing in your area. The type of financing, conventional, atypical, contact information, addresses, phone numbers, and other information of buyer and seller or their legal designee. This information helps to identify helps to identify more positively the parties to the sale. So if we have any questions about related parties. And then your sales data bank. So this is a data bank that you guys maintain for all sales in your county. Those prior items were required. Now these are optional. For me, I say, I don't know why you wouldn't put this stuff in there. Parcel ID, legal, or address. Sales price seems pretty standard to me. Date of sale, again. Economic area identifier. All of these, the abstract code, the current actual value. Why put the current actual value in there?
To see if they're so far apart.
And so do you know what we call that little analysis? Just the assessor's actual value versus what it sold for. What is that? Sales ratio. It's a great indicator of maybe what your market's doing, or is this sale atypical? Is there something maybe weird going on with this sale? Or maybe in my prior reappraisal, we established values and I see a crazy sale ratio. Maybe I didn't have it properly valued the last time. Okay, so it may not always be an indicator of an outlier sale or a weird sale. Maybe it's telling you there was something wrong in the last analysis. And then of course, is this sale qualified or unqualified? We had 2 checkboxes in our sale data bank for qualified, and then we had verified. Verified didn't always get checked. Qualified or unqualified always got checked. Are we going to use this sale or not? The verified, and we'll talk in depth about this, verified is you've gone a step further than saying I don't have reason to unqualify this sale. I've gone a step further and verified that this is a good, sound, qualified sale. And then of course, if it's not qualified, you've got to use your reason codes. And then anytime also you unqualify a sale, good notes will help, because not that you're leaving your office tomorrow. You may not be there in 5 years when that another analysis comes up and that sale is still in your analysis. Good notes will help the person coming along after you understand the terms, conditions of that sale and why wasn't it valid. And I would even put notes in for a good sale, like that Anderson to Anderson. I would put in there, confirmed with buyer, not related parties. Just so that when somebody else comes and looks at that sale and sees Anderson to Anderson, they know I've done that work. It was unrelated parties. So you can put notes on qualified sales too, don't be afraid. Connecting that book and page number. So I'm looking at my sales data bank. I know where to find that deed at the recorder's office, in case I have questions. Grantor grantee in the data bank, the doc fee, the type of conveyance, warranty deed, sheriff's deed, and then any discretionary items you want to attach to that sale, informational things, the grantor grantee relationship, we talked about that. Related parties, well, how are they related? That might be additional. Method of marketing, the days on market, if you have that information, you might want to include that. You may not have days on market. In Gunnison County, we didn't have access to MLS, and it was a very nice tool to have when I do fee appraisal work. Obviously, that's like my go-to source. It was tough not having that in the assessor's office, and it was kind of a thing that the Gunnison Association of Realtors just didn't want the assessor to have that access. We were willing to pay for it. They didn't want us to have it. And then, of course, notes when appropriate. For your data collection, consistency is crucial. So we're on 12. And we recommend developing a county manual, and that will help you consistently track and maintain data in your CAMA system. That way, when I go out to a property, I'm getting the same data as when Tim goes out to a property, because we have guidance. We have a manual that says, here's how you do it. This can define characteristics and give a format for collection. Think field sheet. Explains purpose for which items are collected. Why do we care about view in this subdivision? Why don't we care about it in this subdivision? Defines terms consistently, but must be flexible so that it can adapt to all properties. You don't want it too simple or too detailed. It might not fit, every property might not fit in a box that way. Should include photographs to illustrate definitions. We came up with a view rating scheme in Gunnison County. We modeled it off of, I believe, Summit counties. They had a really nice manual for how they rated view. I went out, took pictures, found some pictures on MLS that I couldn't get from, say, condominium balconies, interior stuff. Any photographs that you can put into those manuals to help illustrate what you're looking for, they will greatly aid future appraisers. The goal here is efficient, accurate, and most importantly, consistent data. Finally, know which elements of comparison impact value in your county or your economic area. So on page A12, you see a list. Basic information should be obtained about the property characteristics that affect value within your valuation model. Examples include, but are not limited to, location, type and style of architecture, age, condition, quality. These are all pretty standard. Size, number of rooms, number of bath and bedrooms. How many counties, show of hands, track bedroom count? Okay, do you value based on bathroom count? Anybody adjust for bedroom count? No. It's important to keep track of. Why? Consistency. We know we have accurate data. Also, when you're doing those regression analysis, you may find down the road that a 1,200 square foot home with 2 bedrooms is selling differently than a 1,200 square foot home with 3. If you found that in your analysis, you would probably want to adjust for that. Basement, partial, full, finished. There was a county that wasn't tracking basements because basements don't add value. Basements do add value. Even if in your market and in your analysis it doesn't, you still need to track it because next reappraisal you may find that it is affecting value this time. And that's why we put a big exhaustive list here, because maybe not all of these things are going to go into your model, and when you analyze they may not indicate a difference. But if they do, and you haven't adjusted for them historically, you may not want to start adjusting to tighten your model, tighten your value range. Type of heating, electric, gas, hot water, garage, attached, detached, number of spaces, site size, topography, shape, accessory buildings, elements of functional or economic obsolescence, any special assessments, tap fees, homeowner association dues. All very important to verify. So where do you get all that information from? Can you get all of that on field inspection? Sometimes.
Yeah, that. I know when I went out, they asked the owner, okay, is this all the same?
Is it all the same? And typically that's going to be good enough. I had occasions where I'd be out on inspection and homeowner would say, do you want to come in? And usually I would say, we don't ask to come in, but if I'm invited in, I'm going to go in. I'm an appraiser. How can I understand this property if I've only viewed it from the outside? They give me that opportunity to come in. Of course I'm going to come in. Even if it's just to stand in the entryway, I'm observing a lot of things in that 5, 10, 15-minute interaction in that entryway. Another key source, though, when you don't get inside is MLS. And like I said, in Gunnison County, we did not have access to the local MLS. Made it really hard to verify certain things. And we actually made a deal with a local realtor that we would get a lot of calls from, questions here and there about things. So you're calling us a lot of times for information. Well, we're going to lean on you a little bit. We're going to send you a list of condos that sold in the county. And if you could just send us the MLS listing for each of those condos, that would be really awesome. And that realtor did that. That realtor was nice, did us the favor, sent us those MLS. For condos, it was really important because all that is interior. I mean, we see the outside of the condo. It might be a 300-unit complex or a 300-unit building. How do I know what each individual unit is? I have to value each individual unit on its market value If I don't have inside information, interior information of that condo, how am I supposed to establish if it's the same or different from another one like statute says? I've got to account for those similarities and dissimilarities. So it's very nice to get that MLS from that realtor. How many counties, show of hands, do have MLS access? Most. And so if you don't, you are hindered. You're hindered in being able to do your job. And you rely on BIA at that point if you can't otherwise find this information. So verification of sales data. By verifying your sales data, you'll ensure that your analysis and subsequent values are defensible. We talk about sales maps. These are useful in the office and in the field. You can code these sales maps to indicate selling price, price per square foot, sale date, use, age, design, size, view, or others. If I'm the commercial appraiser in my county, I map out all my commercial sales. Which area is the hot spot? Which area is not? Is one area selling higher or lower than the other? By making a map, I might be able to determine that right there in the office. So it can aid in selecting your comparable properties. Also may help you determine neighborhood boundaries. You may want to adjust your economic areas or neighborhoods based on sales maps. Find problem areas in your county or anomalies in the market. So the first example, we see 7 sales ranging from $180,200 up to $330,000. I would not look at a map like this to find comps. Why not? We're putting a value indicator on our comps. We're saying, okay, we want a comp that sold at $225,000, $650,000. You can't do that. The comps tell you, say this property is comparable to that property, and then it tells you what the value is, not the other way around. A map like this, if we've identified all these sales as similar properties, we do see some outliers. The tightness in the range is around, the 220, 200,000 mark. We have one sale at 180 and one sale up at 330, an outlier. That might indicate an outlier. So if we've determined these properties are comparable in all other forms, what is the difference that makes that $330,000 sale that much more valuable? Was it just an unknowledgeable buyer? We can take that sale out of our analysis based on an unknowledgeable buyer. Or maybe it was a knowledgeable buyer and they said, I paid over market for this because I wanted this piece of property. It was that important to me to get it. Here's a sales map from Gunnison County. The color coding indicates the year that the property sold. What would a map like this maybe help you with? Looking at this map, I can determine my hot spots. I can determine my spots that most of Gunnison is developed. There's not a ton of new development in there. And you see down here a lot more color than you might see in the rest of the map. Maybe it's a new development. Maybe I can find, you see the color coding. The color coding says, well, in 2018, this neighborhood started to sell. Does that mean there was no desire in 17? What was the impetus for 2018 for this little area to get hot? You can locate stagnant areas in your economic area or hotspots using these yearly sales. Also, if I'm a property owner and the county has this, I can go into my little neighborhood and look, what sold recently? What are they comping me to? Physical inspections should be conducted as close to the sale date as possible. Why do we do that?
In case they change something.
And what do buyers do? He said in case they change something. When a buyer purchases a property, if they're gonna change something, they usually do it pretty quick. Some folks come in and they say, I'm on the 10-year plan, we're gonna eventually have this place exactly how we want it. Most people come in, they say, I'm gonna redo the kitchen, the bathroom, I'm gonna add a little sunroom. Whatever it is, they wanna do it right away so that this house now meets their needs. So if you can conduct your physical inspection the day after it sells, you're gonna get a better window or a better view of what sold and for that consideration or that amount. Establish condition at time of sale, discover any renovations, remodels, additions, or new construction. That's the other thing. It may have happened before the property sold. Seller wants to boost up the selling price or the marketability, so they redo the bathrooms and the kitchen. If we didn't have that in the assessor's office, that we might be putting a bad indication on a bad sale, right? We think everything's average and not updated. It sells for $200,000. Well, if we know that the bathrooms and the kitchen have been updated and it sold for $200,000, maybe an updated one would sell for less. Test the reasonableness and potential indications of adjustments that you might make. Does the sale meet the definition of market value? Grantor-grantee motivation, relationship, general real estate knowledge, local market familiarity. So we're all familiar with the definition of market value. If I'm not knowledgeable in a certain area and I buy property, that may not be a good arm's length indicator of value. And you can find that out through the interview process. One of the questions we had in our questionnaire, it was long. You didn't always get every question asked, but one of the questions I always wanted to get in there, depending on how impatient or patient the person on the other end was, is why did you pick this property over the one next door? I noticed there were 2 properties for sale in the neighborhood. What made you choose this one, especially with vacant land? Really good question to ask. Why this one over the other ones in that subdivision? And there may not be a reason. It may just be that's what my realtor showed me. There may be a compelling reason. We looked at all the lots in this new subdivision, and this one had the best view, or this one had the easiest access, this one had the most privacy. What is your motivation to buy that property? And put those notes in that data bank. What were the terms of the sale? Cash, cash equivalent, other terms? Any conditions? We talked about exposure in a competitive market. That exposure may be limited compared to in a balanced market where there's not a ton of demand. You might have 1-day exposure time. That might be good market exposure in your area. So our interview process. Is the transaction typical of the market as a whole? Is the transaction associated with one type of purchaser or specific property types? Can you guys think of anything that might fit into this caveat where we might want to do some further investigation? One that comes to mind, if you are in an affordable housing situation, and we all probably have affordable housing developments somewhere in our county, those affordable housing sales, they have qualifiers on who can buy that. It's still going to be a valid indicator. We would use those deed restricted or affordable housing units to value other affordable housing units. But we knew that it was specific to that type of buyer. Not everybody in the market can buy that property. You still have to come to a good value on it. Are higher or lower price markets available to all purchasers? We know that's not always the case. The higher price markets are only available to people with a lot of purchasing power. And again, lower price markets may be an affordable housing type of development. Financing and or down payment provided by the seller. Financing, if any, is on terms generally available in the community at the specified date and typical for the property type in the locale. Okay, if that's the case, we're good. So, interview options, in person. Advantages, this is going to be the most effective. Typically, people aren't going to lie face to face. So the information is deemed more reliable, less likely to be refused. And any unusual or special consideration might be revealed. Disadvantages, most expensive, you have to have that person out there doing that. Either going to the properties or setting aside time in the office for the property owners to come to them, probably unlikely. Most of my in-person interviews were conducted when I was out on field inspection. The property sells, it's on my list of properties to visit that day or that week. I go by, knock on the door, and thankfully there's somebody there. That's usually when I got an in-person interview. Rarely was it that they were gonna come down to talk to me about the sale, or I inspect the property and I'm gonna come back out separately for an in-person interview. Only in rare occasions would I do that. We must have a burning question if that's the case. Telephone interview, advantages, quick response, opportunity for immediate clarification, less expensive than in person. I can do this all from my desk. Disadvantages, inability to prove the seller's identity, or the caller's identity. The need for trained staff. I would say that applies to anything where there's staff members reviewing sales information. You may have difficulty reaching the party. Reluctance to supply information over the phone. I called a guy. He purchased a property, and he kind of right off the bat, he was skeptical. He said, "Oh, you're from the county." He said, "Well, I did buy a house in Gunnison County recently, but how do I know this is you? How do I know you're not a random person?" And I said, you can go on to the Gunnison County website. There's a nice little picture of me. It has my desk phone number. Like, why don't we hang up, go check the internet. You'll see that's me. You can call my number and you'll get me back. And he actually did that. He hung up the phone, went on the internet, called the number for this Bill Thompson appraiser guy out of Gunnison County, and he felt more assured now. He said, "Okay, cool, we can finish this up. What do you need to know?" Kind of rare, it was weird, but it worked. And accuracy can be lower than with written or signed documentation over the phone. Maybe they're in a hurry. "Oh, yeah, that's right. Whereas when they're writing it down, they're thinking it out. They're maybe looking at this as like, this is kind of an affidavit of me saying, here's what's true. And then last line of defense, you don't get an in-person interview, you don't get the telephone, or maybe it's a certain type of property. We send out a questionnaire. Commercial, always send out a questionnaire. Vacant land, ag, send out a questionnaire. The advantages, again, it's that written documentation. Somebody filling out a form, writing down the answers, they kind of feel like I'm swearing to this. I'm asserting that this is true. You probably don't have a signature line on your questionnaire, but it's just as good that they took the time to sit there and fill it out. Disadvantages, you may send it out in August and get it back the next year in August. Maybe they're an out-of-state owner and they don't get it for a while. You may find that you need to send additional questionnaires after you get that first one back. The information is going to be limited to what's on the questionnaire. So kind of like with that TD1000, we put those lines in there. Put anything else you think is important. Questionnaire probably doesn't have that. It's going to be specific, check yes or check no. Your printing and mailing cost. A lot of times with questionnaires, we'd always have the taxpayer say, "Well, you sent it to me, but there was no addressed stamped envelope to send it back in. I'm not going to spend my 49 cents to send you back something. You want it, come get it." You may also offer a fax line that they can fax it into if that is an issue. Adequate staff needed to review and process the data. So if you have a stack of questionnaires, but nobody in your office that has the time or professional knowledge to review them, what good do they do, right? Again, an interview with the buyer and seller, either one, preferably both, is going to be your best source of information pertinent to that sale. Data management and analysis. So we talked about the 3 lists. Sales confirmation is vital in securing accurate market data to establish supportable values. All sales are valid unless sufficient and compelling evidence shows otherwise. So we talked about that. We're going to hammer that ad nauseum. You have to leave it qualified until you know why it shouldn't be, and then you use those disqualified reason codes. Again, 3 lists must be maintained, and at the bottom of the first paragraph, page B1, those 3 lists are the master sales list, the qualified verified list, and the non-qualified list. The master transaction list has all property transactions that have occurred in your county during that data gathering period. So it should be at least an 18-month period. It may be longer than that. All transactions are on the master list. All dock fee sales must be included. You can choose to include or not include non-dock fee sales. Again, this is all qualified and non-qualified sales. So with more specificity in our qualified and verified list, sales considered to be arm's length transactions, even if they have not been confirmed or verified, will end up on the qualified verified list. These are the sales that you use to set value, determine your adjustments or adjustment factors, used in the sales ratio studies, and in your final analysis. For larger counties, at a minimum, attempt to verify any outliers. We'll talk about what would constitute or qualify as an outlier. Smaller counties attempt to verify all sales. So it's even harder for the smaller counties to do because they have smaller staffs, right? Hopefully they have a smaller pool of sales that they have to go and confirm. What is the reason? Well, we want to have that volume of sales, high volume of sales, excluding any that are not good indicators of what our market's doing. Qualified sales. The qualified sales exclude any non-dock fee or non-arm's length transactions. All sales on the qualified list must be on that master list. And again, all sales will remain qualified until a reason is discovered to unqualify them. So what's the difference with verified? We go a little step further with verified. Sales are verified using numerous sources, the TD1000 sales questionnaires, and those telephone and personal interviews. Again, you should expect no conflicting information between those various sources, and you should check all of those sources. We do our property inspections to verify the characteristics of the property. And again, sales that have not been verified do not warrant exclusion. You need a reason. Once you have that reason, document the reason. Make sure it's documented so that the next person analyzing or looking at that sale doesn't have to go through the brain damage that you went through to do the verification of excluding it. Verified sales must also be on the master list. So what about our non-qualified? Not every sale wins a medal. Sales invalid for ratio studies and statistical analyses. Go on to our non-qualified list. This will include all non-arm's length transactions, those exempt from a dock fee. And the list in addendum 2, that's the second page to the very back. We won't look at it right now. Lists out all of the types of sales that are exempt from a dock fee. Other times to thoroughly vet a sale. Now these, we're in kind of that gray area. These sales may or may not land on our qualified verified list. Anytime there's a significant remodel, rehab following the purchase, and we talked about that with the example where the guy replaced the roof and all that, he did some work. Did we establish the condition, the quality, the truth of the property at the time of sale? Or did we get a glimpse of the property well after that? Things may have changed. That may not be a good sale. If it's a mixed-use property, if there are multiple improvements, multiple parcel sales, again, not automatically disqualified. Anytime there's trades. I saw a transaction where in this specific subdivision, properties were by and large very comparable. Everything was a 1-acre circle and had common space in between every other circle. Everybody owned that common space. The association owned it. So once you owned a circle, you were part of the association. You owned that in-between property. Owner traded a vacant circle for a circle with an improvement. They included some cash with that vacant land circle, the vacant parcel. So you have vacant land and cash for an improved parcel. Parcels, if they were vacant, would be pretty similar. Maybe it would have been a one-to-one trade, maybe not. We couldn't just say the improved parcel was worth the sum of what we thought a vacant lot was worth plus the financial compensation that was given. Because we don't know the other factors. We don't know what was in all of that negotiating and the meeting of the minds. We weren't privileged to that. You may find out information from the buyer or the seller or both, and you might start to go down a path of saying, maybe I can suss out or parse out what that improvement was worth and what that lot was worth. But generally with that trade, there's just so much going on, moving parts to try to pin down, you're gonna disqualify those trades. If you know very well the value of everything that was in that exchange, you might be able to parse that out. It's unlikely. Typically trades won't be used. Partial interest, anytime it's partial interest, we don't know that a 50% interest sells for half of what a 100% interest is. Partial interest sales typically will get unqualified. And you see there, we say, a sale involving the conveyance of less than the full interest in a property should be excluded from the analysis unless several sales of partial interest in a single property take place at the same time, and the sum of the partial interest equals the fee simple interest. Now, you wouldn't know that unless you had a full 100% fee simple transaction, and if the partial interest supports it, then you know that that partial interest was probably negotiated based on knowledge of what a full 100% interest would transact for. Does that make sense to everybody? Then we will look at a scenario with, once we get into condos, we'll talk a little bit about timeshares, and you'll see where some of that can come in. Anytime it's a land contract, everybody know what a land contract is in here? Essentially owner financed, you might hear this referred to as a contract for deed. So a land contract is not always just conveying land. There may be an improvement there. They call it a land contract. Maybe more appropriate to call that a contract for deed. Essentially, if I own full fee simple ownership of a property, I can sign a contract with you with, let's say, Charles. We're going to sign a contract over the course of 3 years. He's going to make a certain amount of payments to me. And at the end of that 3 years, he's going to make a balloon payment, and then he will get the deed to the property. A lot of times what this does is it's for borrowers or folks who maybe wouldn't qualify for traditional financing, and somebody takes a chance on them, or they don't have maybe a market for their property. They find an untraditional buyer who can't qualify in the traditional form or capacity. The kind of idea here is I make the payments for 3 months. I've now built equity. I can probably take, if, assuming all other things are copacetic to conventional financing, I have built equity now. The bank is more likely to lend me on the remainder that I owe him for that balloon payment, so we can maybe make good on that contract for deed. Sometimes a contract for deed might just be a 15-year term and there is no balloon payment. It's all however they draw it up. But essentially, the deed doesn't transfer until the contract has been fulfilled. So say I sign a contract for deed today, and in 15 years it's complete and the property actually transacts, that land contract is not an actual sale. Nothing has sold. It's just me saying, I'm going to agree to keep making these payments. Well, if I default on those payments, he gets to keep all the money that I've given him, and he gets the title to the property. He maintains that title to property. So more dangerous for the buyer, not as much protection, but if you are that atypical buyer who doesn't qualify, it might be a way to get in there. Anytime there's incomplete or unbuilt common property, so typically with a PUD, you might see this. They say, we've got building number 1 is constructed. They start advertising these and trying to sell them. Once building number 2 is complete, there'll be a tennis court, a swimming pool, and your parking structure will be also part of building 2. Building 2 is not complete yet. Okay, we don't know that that's gonna happen. The buyer is under the assumption, and they're paying consideration under the assumption that that is gonna come to fruition. But until it does, we don't know that that is an indicator of what they actually purchased. Auctions. In general, they tend to be at the lower end of the price spectrum, right? 1031 exchange, do we unqualify? We'll talk a little bit more about 1031 exchange later on if we get there, if we have the time. It's essentially, I have an income producing property. I want to buy a different income producing property. I'm gonna sell this one, parlay the money into another income producing property. The IRS won't take any capital gains tax from you if that's what you do. If you sell a property for $600,000, now I have $600,000 to invest in another income producing property. If I do that within a certain amount of time, then everything is good, and it could be a totally fair market transaction. But what can happen with a 1031 exchange is I get my $600,000, it's sitting in an account, and I know I need to pick up a new property. I'm starting to get towards the end of that time frame. Now there's a little bit of duress, or not duress, but there's a different motivating factor for me to buy a property. So I might just find one that works. It may not be, I might not be looking out for my best interest. Maybe I am willing to pay $600 to this seller who wants $600, even though I only think it's worth $550, but that's because I have $600 and I'm probably gonna lose enough in the capital gains tax if I didn't do it that I might as well just parlay that. You find a sale like that, what would you know, we know the market value is $550, seller wouldn't budge, sold it for $600. We probably don't wanna use that sale at $600. And can we adjust it? Probably not. That might be an invalid sale. Not always. Typically, those 1031 exchanges will be good sales. And on that TD 1000, we specifically asked that question if this transaction was part of a 1031 exchange. Anytime there's a change in classification, of course, you cannot use those for time trending, but you can use those to value. What was purchased at the time of sale is what you're analyzing. Then anytime there's a resale of a property. Generally, if there's a resale of a property, can we use either? Can we choose? Do we use both? What do we do?
Isn't it the most recent sale? The most recent.
Why would we use the most recent?
Because it's the most recent, like, timestamp of that property's value.
Right, if things are changing over time, the most recent is gonna give us a better indicator of right now value. There are some weird scenarios where a resale, you might actually use both. You might unqualify both. Say a property sells, it's in poor condition, sells at the beginning of your base period, totally remodeled, the quality condition don't even look the same, the effective age is different now, resells again. If it's a different beast that sold from the first time, if it's a different animal, then you can potentially analyze both of those sales and use them as an indicator. Typically, you're gonna say, we're gonna use the more current sale for sure. Do we feel confident about the older sale? Maybe we do use that older sale. Of course, you would time trend if that was appropriate. So on B6, sales in which a dock fee generally applies, but there's something, maybe a little bit putting this, some circumstance of this sale that is putting it into that gray area. Those sales are vetted and either fall on the qualified or unqualified list. And just to point out, down at 70 other, because this is not a comprehensive list, and there are numerous other reasons to unqualify a sale, the auditor said, we'll give you number 70, and you have to give us the description of why that one was unqualified. Anything unqualified under number 70, as you see at the bottom there, must be extensively documented as to the reason the sale has been determined non-arm's length. All right, when multiple adjustments are required, personal property first, financing or favorable atypical financing, adjust for the conditions of the sale, and time adjustment. Again, make those adjustments in that order. We wouldn't want to do a time adjustment and then take out the personal property, right? Because that value of the personal property, we don't want to time adjust. We're trying to time adjust the real property value only. Personal property adjustments. Adjustments to isolate the value of real property reflected in the sale price as required by statute. May include adjustments for personal property, property taken in trade by the seller, or incomplete or unbuilt common property. So we talked about that trade. Say we thought it was a one-to-one trade, but I included a $20,000 plow truck. I might adjust that sale $20,000 to account for that plow truck. And any other market sales that we have that indicate that value, we've adjusted that down now. Again, the idea here, isolate the value of the real property only. Personal property amounts may be evidenced through the contract, closing statements, or a TD1000. Sometimes a separate bill of sale. When I do a fee appraisal, I get to see a contract, a sales contract, and it lists out specifically if the contract includes those personal property items. And it will say what those inclusions are, what the exclusions are. At the assessor's office, we don't get that information. We do not get to see a sales contract. Maybe 1 out of a million appeals, you might get a sales contract. We're going to look at that TD1000 in lieu of a sales contract and hope that it was filled out accurately and that any personal property that should be accounted for is listed. Arbitrary adjustments should never be used. So when I'm adjusting for personal property, let's say that I've established in my Econ Area 1, personal property accounts for 3% of the sale, and every typical sale has 3% personal property. Would I adjust 3% on every sale then? Remember, we adjust for atypical things that are transacting in these sales. So if everything includes 3%, why would we adjust everything at 3%, leave it as is? If it's atypical and it's 5%, what would we adjust that at? Typical is 3, maybe adjust 2%. But if you do arbitrary adjustments, I've heard counties say whether personal property is listed as a yes or a no on the TD1000, they always adjust 2% of the sale price for personal property every time. That would be an arbitrary across the board adjustment, and those are not to be used. We want specific evidence. Why are we adjusting this sale? If your personal property adjustment is substantial, so a $40,000 property sells with a $20,000 plow truck, you may consider unqualifying that sale. You've verified, yes, it was the market value, the blue book on this is probably $20,000. They agreed it was worth $20,000. Buyer and seller both were in agreement. The consideration was $40,000 plus this truck. You might just want to make that sale a non-valid sale because is the $20,000 remaining? Was that all real property? Was there some other incentive? Do we know that? You might be able to use it. You might also consider disqualifying a sale like that. Again, you're going to want support if you do disqualify. Financing adjustments, we're not going to go through these too in depth. When financing reflects prevailing market practices, sales prices don't require adjustment, but sometimes there are favorable terms that are not available to all participants in the market. When the sales reflect these favorable terms or maybe unfavorable because I'm not a very qualified buyer, maybe somebody says, I'll seller finance that at a higher interest rate, then an adjustment would be appropriate. We have cash equivalency, page B8. These should be considered when the seller does not receive the full cash proceeds or receives extra cash proceeds for whatever reason. What you will do is take your sales price, add or subtract those incentives, and you get your market value. So can you adjust something that sold like this? Yes, you could. Can you use that sale? If you are confident in your adjustment, if you are confident in the value of those incentives, then this could be a good, reliable indicator of market value. Seller-assisted down payments. You have your contract price, take out the seller's donation, and you get to market value. Seller paid points. So everybody know what points refer to? When you finance a property, you have your mortgage. A point is 1% of that mortgage. That's what they refer to as points. To the seller paid points example, property sells for $400,000. The seller agrees, I will pay 3 points to facilitate this sale. Atypical for the market, so a typical seller does not pay any points. We have an 85% loan to value ratio. What is the indicated sales price? So we have to do a little bit of backtracking. Pretty easy to do, you just have to catch it. $400,000, my loan to value ratio was 85%. That means the buyer here put up 15% equity, and now they have a mortgage for 85% of the purchase price. 85% of the purchase price is $340,000. That's the mortgage. That's what we want to find the 3 points. Multiply that by 0.03, 3%, and that equals 10,200. So I take the 10,200, subtract it from my purchase price, and I get the actual consideration. Long story short here, the seller contributed $10,200 to this sale. B10, condition of sale adjustment. It might be appropriate when there's short marketing times. The sale has been consummated under duress. They're related parties. Atypical motivations. We're saying we're going to make an adjustment for a condition of the sale. Maybe it was short marketing times. If we have a defendable adjustment to say, well, typically a property exposed to the market for this period of time will realize 95% of asking price, but there was no exposure time here. Maybe we know that adjustment factor. That's going to be a really hard one to figure out an adjustment for. It could be a lot easier to find out related parties. Maybe my brother sold me the house, gave me a deal. We established market value, and my brother gave me 20% off market value. His note was lower than that amount. Could you use that sale? It's pretty flimsy. You're going on somebody's word, that 20%, and if you trust that, you could potentially make that adjustment for the related party discount, so to speak, adjust that sale price back to market value. Typically, these are going to be unqualified sales. Other adjustments, anytime the buyer pays an expense that is typically paid by the seller, you would add that to the sale price. Anytime the seller pays an expense that is typical for the buyer, deduct that from the sale price. So if the typical seller pays closing costs and commissions, and in this sale the buyer has to do that, we're going to add that amount to the sale price. Typically, the seller would have covered that. The buyer incurred extra expense. Time adjustment. This is going to account for changing market conditions. We're not just blanket adjusting for time here. We have to adjust for the change in the market over that time. So generally speaking, real estate appreciates in value, but that's not always the case. And when real estate levels out, no time adjustment may be necessary. When it starts to decline, a negative time adjustment might be necessary. The key is we're looking at those market conditions changing over time, not just, oh, time elapsed, so we have to adjust. Adjust level of value for sales occurring early in the base period to the appraisal date. That level of value, basically that's saying sales in the base period appraised as of June 30th of your even numbered year. So median sales price, just kind of illustrate a time trend. I have the base period in red bars, and clearly up at the top there you can see for single family properties, we have a market increasing about 21%, townhouse condo 24%. Use your data for your time adjustment, and if it's not making sense, or if you just want assistance because it's so crazy and hard to do, call us at the DPT, who will help you with your time trend. Stratification of sales. We're going to sort our sales into homogeneous groups for analysis and valuation. Once data becomes too sparse, we cease stratification. So I might say Econ Area 1. I further stratify into condominium properties. Maybe I have condominium properties that are on the ski area. Maybe I can further stratify that and say I've got condominium properties on the ski area of this size. Once I keep going smaller and smaller with my category, if I get to a point where I have 30 or fewer sales, and again, we say you don't need 30 sales to establish a market value. We've talked about that. Now we're talking about setting value, setting adjustments. 30 or fewer sales, statistical significance occurs, if any of you have taken statistics classes, around 30. So when you have a sample size of around 30, you can get a decent statistical indicator. So if you're going to stratify further, and further, and you find, okay, I don't have enough base area condos, I just need to stay with Econ 1 condos, and then I have 40 sales. Okay, stop stratifying at that point and start to analyze. So we stratify by class, subclass, or use, right? We're not gonna analyze a commercial sale with residential sales. We're not gonna analyze a bar with a gas station, so that's subclass. Econ area, breaking it out further into neighborhood, then subdivisions or filings, and then finally, if you do have enough sales in the bigger counties, you might even stratify by design type, age, quality. Again, that's when you have abundant data. Sometimes the stratification will stop at the neighborhood level. We'll just say every single family home in this neighborhood is getting analyzed together. Then we have to account for those differences and similarities at the neighborhood level. You see at the top of your page, this course will only cover sales ratio calculations as a preliminary analysis in the sales confirmation program. For sales confirmation, these sales ratios can be an indicator of market problems, trends, activity, and you can also identify those outlier sales. We say you identify and flag them. We flag them because we know this sale is not fitting our standard curve for some reason. What is it that is causing this not to fit? There's an irregularity. We need to find out what that is. Again, review. The sales ratio is the relationship between the assessor's actual value and the sales price. So we take the assessor's value divided by the sales price, and that equals our sales ratio. So an example, the assessor has the property valued at $100,000. We see it sell during our base period at $120,000, 100 over 120, and we get a sales ratio of 0.83. This might just be an indicator of what our market's doing. 0.83 is not a crazy high or low sales ratio. So again, it might indicate maybe a little bit of work's been done to the property, and pair that with our increasing market, maybe that explains that sales ratio. Median, we all know what a median is. You array your data in order. If you have an odd data set, the middle value is your median. Half of the values are below and half the values are above. We use a median a lot more than an average in assessment and appraisal, because with averages, those outliers can really affect our average. If we have say we put a 100 in this set is pretty close to 1, we have 1 up at 100, that's gonna totally skew the average. But what does it do to our median? Our median only went up to 4.5. And that's your even data set. If you have an even data set, you average the middle two numbers. So in the first case, 4 is our median. Here, we've got to actually take an average, which I know it's kind of weird, but the median value being half the values occurred above and half below at 5.5. Yes, it's the average of those, but we took the average of two medians essentially. Okay, back to outliers, properties with very high or very low sales ratios. Anytime you see a ratio below 0.5 or above 1.5, you should be thinking, I need to review this sale. I would even say 0.75 to 1.25 is when I start to wonder. If I know there's maybe a 20% increase or decrease in my market, what's that other 5%? I might easily be able to figure that out, but that's still a pretty high or low sales ratio if you're 25% away from the assessed value. So let's look at a little sales ratio exploration. This is a 30-acre parcel in Gunnison County. You can see it's got some river frontage here. Maybe some land that we don't use over here. Oh, sorry, the river frontage is here. What am I looking at? You can see there's some highway frontage, some either excess or surplus land. We don't know. Does that have a highest and best use separate from the main parcel? So the 2017-2018 assessor actual value on this was $1.7 million. And you can see it's really nice. They have these custom private fishing ponds. They've diverted water out from the river to make these ponds. They stock them with fish. They've got beautiful views. Again, you see that river frontage. You see the two improvements. There's even some acreage over there that looks like it's been cut down, like they've maybe had some grass over there. Again, there's those fishing ponds. Real nice setting. Okay, looking north towards Crested Butte. Horses are welcome. You see even back in the background there's a little goat. Okay, so assessor's value, $1.7 million. The sale amount on 5/2/2017 was more than double. Okay, and remember, the 2017-2018 value would have come from which appraisal date? June 30th of 16, right? So this thing sells not even a year later. We've valued it based on our knowledge of the 2016 analysis and reappraisal. We come to a value of 1.7. It sells not even a year later for more than double that. So our sales ratio here, assessor's value divided by the sale amount, 0.482. That hits that outlier as we defined it, less than 0.5. And you know, even if this thing was a 0.75, you'd be like $1 million off. That's a lot. I would definitely review that outlier. Okay, so what do we think was going on here? So we talked about the river frontage. Maybe that river frontage wasn't accurately captured by the CAMA system. Maybe we don't have a modifier or a multiplier for that. Maybe it's ag land. We know that ag land does not value at market. So if we had ag land value on this, say it was only on part of the acreage, say it was on all 30 of the acres, say they're integral, and the entire 30 acres gets the ag land deduction, that might explain that huge difference, okay? Is it the highway frontage? Possibly this extra land, that strip that runs along the highway, maybe that is excess land and we can sell that off, subdivide it off, sell it off with its own highest and best use. Maybe that's part of the reason that we were so far off. We weren't accounting for that. Are there water rights with that land? How do we value those? How do we think about water rights when we're valuing land? Water rights a personal property right in Colorado. I don't want to go too far into this wormhole because I will confuse a lot of you. With property rights, it's just like that swimming pool at a condo association. It's inherent in the value of the land. So if you have water rights, that land sells, that water value is inherent in the value of the land. We don't need to look at it any further than that. We don't value water rights separately. Well, I'll tell you, it was none of those things. It was a really bad value. And there was no ag classification on the land at the time. Potential river frontage was accounted for. They had the lot at 35 acres of riverfront. In Gunnison, there were 3 different classifications of land. You had sage, meadow, and river. So if you're on a river, you got river. If you were in a meadow, you got meadow. If you were in the trees, you got meadow. And if you're in the sage land, you got sage. And it was very distinct, the differences in value. We would see them in the sales. If you're in sage, it sold cheaper than meadow, sold cheaper than river. So we were accounting for the river frontage. Maybe we needed to do a front foot multiplier for how much river frontage. Who knows? I will tell you the 2019-2020 value is $3.6 million. That sale, the purchase of this property, fell into the base period that set value for 2019 and 2020. So it makes sense. But maybe there just weren't good indicators of what is a 35-acre riverfront property with 2 improvements a main house, and then a auxiliary barn with living areas above. So unfortunately, I know it's unfulfilling to not get an answer. I will say when I looked at it at the property record card now, they have adjusted the quality and condition of those buildings to very good. Compliance requirements, so that your median sales ratio for res, commercial, industrial, and vacant must fall between 0.95 and 1.05. All right, now we have a sales ratio calculation. We show you guys how to do that. In some of our classes, we make you guys actually punch them in and type them out and do all that, but we're not gonna make you do that. How do we find our median sales ratio? So we've calculated our sales ratios for all of these sales. Actual value, assessor's actual value divided by the sale price. Now we just have to array them by the ratio to find our median sales ratio. So we've arrayed them. Now what value falls in the middle? That 0.921 becomes our median. Below 0.95, you're out of compliance. So remember, outliers can heavily distort ratio studies when the number of sales is limited. Outliers should be carefully reviewed, and you may end up removing them because of something you find out about that transaction. The goal of sales qualification is to obtain an adequate number of representative sales, not to find generic reasons to exclude sales. If a limited number of sales does exist, it's better to adjust sales than to delete them. You have to be able to defend adjustments too, though. Briefly talk about complex commercial analysis. When verifying a commercial property, the number of elements or items that require confirmation expands significantly. Some common commercial units of comparison for a hotel room, we have per room, you see this on your sheet, office per square foot leasable area, net rentable area, you'll see parking garage, retail, theater, per space, per square foot, per seat. Mini storage might be per unit, car wash per bay. The type of commercial property is what is gonna determine the size of your sales search. So we look at, in Colorado, ski resorts or amusement parks. We might expand to a more regional search for comps if we were gonna value that on a market, right? Going from your kind of mom and pop retail to your big box outlet. So obviously with the neighborhood retail, you're gonna have a smaller search area. With a big box, you might only have one of those in a 200-mile region. You might have to go out of state lines. And one of the court cases that we will look at talks about exactly that, expanding your search to what is considered a reasonable market area. So on 16 and 17, there's a checklist. The idea here, you go out on your field inspection with this checklist. Anything that you can fill out on this checklist before you get out there should be filled in. So a lot of that information on the first half of that first page, a lot of that can be filled in. Condition of sale, maybe not. And the expenditures made after purchase. Personal property. Okay, this is important for commercial. Why? At some point, personal property for commercial property owners becomes taxable. So you're reviewing a commercial sale and you see that $15,000, $20,000 worth of personal property has been transacted. Okay, I should adjust the sale price for the real property based on that knowledge. Typically with commercial, there will be a separate bill of sale speaking to those personal property items. But now I should probably go let my personal property appraiser know that, what was the last declaration that came through on this business? Here's what they're saying it's worth during this sale. Maybe another cross check for them to see test of reasonableness. Is the personal property account set at the right level of value? Condo sales analysis. Condominium defined as typically a single real estate unit in a multi-unit development with shared common elements. These can be residential, commercial, industrial, or a combination. We saw that combination in one of our sales earlier. You must understand the components being conveyed because these will vary widely from one condo complex to another. Some good resources to look at, obviously the deed. But now when we get into condominium properties, we're looking at declarations, condominium declarations, plat maps. Those are going to be additional resources that you're going to have to look at to find out what is being conveyed. Again, similar units should be compared. So if I'm setting my condo model, I have multiple variations of condo complexes. I might be able to separate out condos that have some shared amenities like a pool, an elevator, parking structure, versus those that don't have those types of shared common elements. Another thing to look at is the HOA fees. Typically, if it's got high HOA fees versus low HOA fees, those might sell differently. And what's included in that HOA is probably going to be different, resulting in that difference in monthly HOA dues. Oftentimes, condos will include personal property. Sometimes you'll see memberships or other intangible items. Some other intangibles that I've seen with especially timeshare properties, maybe you get 2 ski lift tickets for the week that you come into town, or you come in a summer week, you're coming during the week, a week in the summer, you get greens fees to the golf course that's nearby that has some kind of relationship with that condo association or timeshare. And again, a checklist is a great tool to verify these components being conveyed. You see that checklist on 19 and 20. Again, a lot of the general information, you should have that filled out or be able to fill that out prior to any kind of field inspection. Quality of unit, that's a tough one if you don't get inside the unit. It's hard to get inside a lot of those units. So you might be relying on your MLS listing the photographs and the descriptions in there to determine a quality rating. We actually did that in Gunnison County. We redid our condominium model in 2016 reappraisal and I created a list of 11 different property characteristics that I went out on all the sales, gathered those. When we analyzed them, there were a few of those that were statistically significant, showed these need to be accounted for and adjusted for. And one of them was access to the unit. So if I'm in a 5-story building, do I have an elevator? I have better access. If I'm in a 5-story building and I have to use stairs, my access isn't very good. So I rated that access on an objective scale where we delineated out access level 1, access level 5, and everything in between, gave a general description so that appraisers in the future could rate future sales based on this access. And then we had to go the problem with it. So we did access, we did proximity to the ski resort, and then we added 2 big ones, interior quality and interior condition. And we knew exterior quality and exterior condition from historic record, and that seldom changes in such a large building. You see a big remodel of the entire complex, you might see a condition change. But with that interior condition and quality, there's a big problem. I have to apply that now. I've analyzed what my adjustment factor is for this component, and we've set that adjustment factor. Now, how do I apply that to the population of things that haven't sold? And I don't know the interior condition and quality for all of those other units. So we had to do a BIA on all of them and apply that to the population. You would hope that in appeal you would catch the ones that you BIA'd the information incorrectly. You would hope so. Some other differences you might see, this is in the same condominium complex. You'll have a standalone and a triplex, okay? With a standalone, you probably are gonna have a separate condominium model. So even though these things are in the same condominium complex, they might be pulling out of a different model in my CAMA system. One's on the standalone condo model, which might be more similar to single family. We have to account for the fact that it is part of a condominium and has an HOA. But do you think a standalone's gonna sell the same as a triplex? The middle unit or even an end unit in that triplex, probably not gonna sell the same as that standalone that's literally across the street. And the other thing that kind of is just crazy to me is buying something like this, and this is just maybe a personal aside, you don't even own that land. The people across the street in the triplex, they own that land with you. Now, it could be a limited common element where only I have the use of this common element. It's common to all of us, but it's limited to my use. Or it could be a general common element. That's what you look at those plat maps and the condo declaration for. So back to those general common elements, these are enjoyable and usable by all owners. Structure, roofing, and exterior of the building, the land, all stairways, enclosed entrances, laundry facilities, clubhouses, pools, hot tubs, exercise rooms, tennis courts. Typically, these are going to be shared, general common elements. Not always. You might have a fancy condo and you have your own hot tub out on the limited common element of your deck or your porch. And then any other real property amenities. Limited common elements, not all owners get to enjoy or use. May include garages. Some might be a first come, first serve. Some have assigned spaces. Some even have a separately deeded as if it were its own condominium unit. Storage closets or storage units, any balconies. So if you have this nice balcony at this condo complex, I believe it's 3 Seasons in Crested Butte, you have a great view. Somebody on the other side of that building, they can't come and use this common element, even though they have to help fix it up when it needs paint or needs to be refinished, whatever. They're gonna help you pay for it. You're gonna help pay for theirs. You don't get to use each other's unless you're friends. These are the plaza condos in Crested Butte. Just some other differences to be mindful of when you're looking at condominiums. We actually rated the views. So are you looking west? Are you looking south? Are you looking north? If you're looking north in this building, you don't have a great view. But if you are located on this east side, parking lot side, that's your view. Again, back to access. Which floor am I on? The floor will matter if there's no elevator in my building. My access might be limited if I'm up on a higher floor and I have stairs. Am I on the garage side for this specific building? Am I on the garage side or am I on the other side? Is my unit on the opposite side of the garage? It takes me a little longer to get there. I'm carrying my big ski boot, my skis and my boots and all that. Some buyers might not even be looking on that side of the building. If there's not something over here on the first floor, I don't want it. Okay, that's a very particular buyer. And then again, you see some common amenities there, tennis courts, over the covered parking. Some of those general common elements. Other things in this complex, they had a front desk, kind of rare for a condo. A lot of these units get short-termed out though. They had an on-site dining facility, indoor and outdoor hot tubs. Not every place will have that. So again, back to the comparison, if I'm gonna compare a condo unit in a building that does not have all these amenities, I may set my value for these units, and I may adjust if I don't have sales in that other building, but I know it doesn't share some of these nice amenities, I might adjust downward. Whatever the market tells me. Again, you've got to have defensible adjustments. Sometimes as appraisers, we say, well, you know, that condo association that doesn't have a pool, we've got a restaurant. You can't just assume that based on what I think would cause value to be realized, that's what does it. You've got to look to the market. The market has to tell you that. So on to timeshares. We're almost through condos. I know this one gets a little long. So there's different structures of timeshares, and we're seeing these more and more in the state. Some of your counties probably will never see them. Some of you guys already have had BAA cases on them. With the rotating monthly ownership, one unit is split into 12 equal interests, and they rotate. So if I own a 1/12 interest in this type of a timeshare, I get 1 month a year. Maybe this year it's January, next year it's February. In 12 years, I'll come back to having January again. We can look at those timeshare sales as being equal. So if we have a handful of those timeshare sales, we can say, all right, let's add them up to 12, and that's potentially an indicator of market value. Always test that against what does a wholly owned fee simple condominium sell for in comparison. If it's less than what this suggested adds up to, so say each share sold for $15,000, I add those up and get $180,000. And then I look at my wholly owned fee simple condo and it's selling for $170,000. Maybe $10,000 of that is in some of these memberships and some of these other amenities that you're getting through the timeshare ownership. So you should never exceed the value of a wholly owned unit. Then there's the other timeshare model where each unit is split up into weekly ownerships. One ownership equals 52, or one unit equals 52 different weekly ownerships. Okay, now apply that to a 300 unit complex. You now have 15,600 property owners. Do you have to send a tax bill to each one of them? No. Colorado did not torture you like that. I think it's California that says you do have to. What we suggest, and because these ownerships are not equal, if I own the first week in January, that's a pretty primo week at a ski resort versus the third week in May when it's mud season and there's nothing to do up there. But those are two different ownerships. Can I compare those? Can I say, let me just multiply those two by 25 and I've got my total? It'll never work. So with this type of timeshare, we do not look at sales of those individual units. What we look at are those individual timeshares. What we look at is a sale of a wholly owned unit, and then we know that there's probably going to be some type of adjustment factor for it. Some states have statutory adjustment factors that they say a wholly owned unit is reduced by 50%, and then that'll equal the value of the total timeshare. If you guys ever get into timeshares, give me a call, and hopefully we can make some sense of some sales. Obviously, we don't expect you, and the state doesn't expect you to analyze 15,600 sales in one condo building to find out what those timeshares are worth. And the statute says we send one bill for the entirety of the complex under these timeshare structures to the HOA, and they parse out among the owners. But we still have to come to a value of what this whole thing's worth. All right, we got through complex commercial, condominiums, some other kind of strange things that can occur. Sometimes you'll see multiple level sales, or what we call a two-tiered market. So this can occur when potential purchasers, separate groups of potential purchasers, are exposed to different marketing techniques. And I'm not sure if it's happening in any of your counties, but I know down in Costilla County, I looked at a subdivision called Forbes Park, and there are a ton of parcels in there, and there are not that many people that really want to own these parcels. There are some that have houses on and some lived in year-round, but what happens, there's like 4,000 something parcels in this one subdivision. And they're anywhere between 1 to 5 acres, I think. There's a lot of variation. You can kind of get what you want. But what happened in this subdivision, it's Forbes Park because Forbes, the magazine namesake, he owned a ton of land in Costilla County back in the day and all in southern Colorado, subdivided as much as they could. And it was easy to do back then. And now there's these massive subdivisions with tons of parcels that have very little value. But there are some locals who want to buy into Forbes Park, and they buy in. And then there's these, I don't know what to call them. They're like investment holding companies out of California. And they go to tax sale every year, and they buy up as many things in Forbes Park as they can. And they might buy some stuff on the open market, but as cheap as they possibly can. And they go and turn around and market it to out-of-state and sometimes out-of-country buyers as own your piece of heaven in Colorado. And they sell something that they paid $100 at tax sale to acquire, they sell it for $6,500 or $10,500 because it's got a view. And could you imagine valuing a subdivision like that where half your sales are these unknowledgeable out-of-state buyers and half of them are local, knowledgeable, I bought this because I wanted a place to come camp 2 weeks in July. In the case of Forbes Park, we know that there's this hustler out in California. He probably doesn't leave his desk when he's doing this hustle. He doesn't have to go show these properties or bring potential clients in or anything like that. But he's sitting there at the desk and somebody bites on an internet listing or somebody calls his office and he says, yeah, it's great, own some heaven, and he sells it to that person. That is an unknowledgeable buyer, not maybe acting in their best interest. So does that meet the level of market value? Market value, remember, I'm acting in my own best interest. Knowledgeable, willing buyer, willing seller. There's so many iterations of market value out there now. They all kind of have some common themes. One of the court cases we'll look at kind of hopefully ties them together. That's actually like a hodgepodge of court cases that tie them together. But when you see that, you could say, those out-of-state buyers, if you can identify who those out-of-state buyers are and which parcels transacted in that market, you might just unqualify those sales. The other problem in that subdivision was there were a lot of multi-parcel sales, and there was variation in those multi-parcel sales. So maybe the multi-parcel sales is your market. Now, determining what the 1.5 acre was worth versus the 3.5 acre that both transferred on the same deed, that becomes a challenge. So hopefully you have enough single parcel sales that you can start to establish and make sense of some of those multi-parcel sales, and then you might be able to include them, adjust them, however you need to. But I don't think Costilla County's alone in that problem. Do you guys have them a lot? Yeah, because Forbes owned property all throughout that part of Colorado and all the way into New Mexico. So that's a two-tier market. The other thing that you could do is you might say, well, we've established that this higher tiered market, these out-of-state unknowledgeable buyers, they're buying at this premium. Maybe we can adjust those sales because maybe they were educated enough, but they just wanted to own that piece of Colorado heaven, and they thought that's what they were getting, and they agree that that's what they got. Anomalies in the marketplace require adjustment to the sale price before use as comparables, if a defendable adjustment can be established. The assessor determines if the sale is included or not. And of course, when we say we're not going to include that sale, we need to keep documentation. Oftentimes the TD1000 helps, supplemental questionnaire, and then thorough notes anytime that you are unqualifying that sale. The TD1000, we keep that as documentation. It's a confidential document. So typically, and I know some counties are keeping a digital copy of the TD1000, and the assessor's office never even sees the physical copy. I don't know if it gets stored away somewhere by the clerk and recorder, shredded, whatever, once it's in a digital format. As long as you can secure that digital file, you're going to keep that thing confidential. Be careful, assessors. You might save room in the office, but you might open yourself up for these confidential documents being exposed because the hackers are out there everywhere. Again, random or arbitrary exclusion of sales is never okay. Confidential data, statutory requirements. Number 1, inspection of data by taxpayers. At the request of any taxpayer or any agent of such taxpayer, the assessor shall promptly make available all of the data used by the assessor in determining the actual value of any property owned by such taxpayer, including but not limited to data derived by the declarations, the TD1000, confidential data, provided that such confidential data shall be presented in such a manner that the source cannot be identified. Separate consideration for personal property. Any such evidence shall not be recorded or filed by the clerk, county clerk and recorder, and shall not be subject to public inspection. Simply used to make those adjustments for personal property, but we cannot share that with the public. TD1000 is confidential. At the bottom of the paragraph, we see the county assessor shall make any declaration available for inspection by any taxpayer who was the grantee specified in the conveyance document, or who filed such declaration. So the grantee can always look at it. If the grantor filed the declaration, they can also look at it. The person conducting any valuation for assessment study, so that is Wild Rose, they get to look at your TD1000s, and their employees, anybody employed by Wild Rose, and my boss, Joanne Groff, the property tax administrator, and her employees. Hearings on appeal. The assessor may not rely on any confidential information which is not available for review by the taxpayer unless such confidential data is presented in such a manner that the source cannot be identified again. And we go further. The assessor must make available to the taxpayer all information used to determine a valuation, including all data used to create the valuation model. So we had this interesting call. Taxpayer wanted the assessor's work file because this statute says you must provide all data used to create the valuation model. So do you have to give them the model? Do you have to give them the formula? What is the data used to create that? Anybody want to guess? The sales. So when the taxpayer requests this data, the data that you used was the sales that you qualified and verified as good sales. What you provide the taxpayer in this request is the sales. You don't, your models, your formulas are proprietary. You don't provide that stuff. Under B, you see the assessor could prepare and have available summaries of sales and income data. So we know sale and income data is also confidential. But as long as the identifiable information has been redacted or somehow removed, you can share. Neighborhood 1 would reflect gross rents ranging from X to Y and expenses ranging from A to B. You summarize the information, and that way it's in a form that's presentable to the taxpayer where you're not divulging any confidential information. And there is a penalty for divulging confidential information, except when pursuant to an order of any court of competent jurisdiction or is otherwise provided by law. Any person who divulges or makes known in any way the contents of any private document to a person who is not authorized to have access to that document shall be punished by a fine of not less than $100, nor more than $500, or by imprisonment in the county jail for not more than 3 months, or by both such fine and imprisonment. So maybe it's not a very big dollar amount on the fine, and you can spare $100. 3 months in jail would be pretty rough. Don't divulge your confidential information. It's tough when a taxpayer calls and says, you've got this sale. In Gunnison, we would actually list the sale price and then the adjusted sale price. And they'd always say, well, that adjusted sale price, that's the personal property, right? And it accounted for personal property, also accounted for a time adjustment. So we weren't inherently giving them a workaround to find out the personal property amount. Because there is always, and there's not always a time adjustment, but you can say that's been adjusted for time, personal property items, and any other non-realty items is what that adjusted sales price was. I think they went away from showing the two separate prices and just said, here's the sales price, and that was the adjusted sales price. Foreclosures. You might come across on a sheriff's deed, public trustee's deed, deed in lieu of foreclosure. Foreclosure is the legal process in which a mortgagee forces the sale of a property to recover all or part of a loan in which the mortgagor has defaulted. And again, a sheriff's deed or public trustee's deed are the two instruments that may be recorded as evidence of a foreclosure. The deed in lieu of foreclosure may also be recorded, and this is a deed given by an owner or debtor in lieu of a foreclosure by the lender or mortgagee. So they're in the process of foreclosing on me, and I say, here's the deed, don't foreclose, it's yours. Have it back. Either way, the bank's getting it back. These deeds do not represent market value because the seller is the borrower who has defaulted on the loan. The borrower is conveying the property to the lender in order to forestall a foreclosure action. These transactions are usually excluded from all analyses. Typically, the amount on there will represent the lien against the property and not the entire property market value. So REO, real estate owned, resulting from a foreclosed property. These can be used in a market analysis. This may be your market. Back in 2008, 2009, this was the typical market. Colorado Constitution and statute requires sales by a lender or government be considered. This would be a sale by a lender. Of course, we want to determine the transaction details and the property condition at the time of sale. Like I said with the one example, there was that bank sale. Am I a good sale? A lot of times with those REO sales, the prior owner who went into foreclosure and thus lost the property, they kind of stop caring about the property, and they might even be a little bit spiteful. And so there can be condition issues that your CAMA system doesn't have in there. You've got to go inspect it and find that out. B27, speculative sales constituting unfulfilled agreements. Speculative sales, there are 4 criteria for this. The following conditions must be met for any sale before any sale is considered for disqualification based on speculative sales constituting unfulfilled agreements. The anticipated event must be a real possibility. Okay, so I have this subdivision. The hospital is about to be built, and I'm selling all these properties based on the fact that the hospital is going to be built. The anticipated event must be a real possibility. The increase in sales activity and sale price must be documented because of this anticipated event. And then the anticipated event must fail to materialize. And sales must be confirmed as non-arm's length prior to disqualification. Individual sales, which analyses indicate may be speculative sales based on specific event, must be confirmed as non-arm's length before they are disqualified. Further analysis, the contract contained a contingency clause. The buyer walked away from the agreement, forfeiting the down payment and any accrued equity. Financing was owner will carry. Typical lending institution would not finance. Cash transactions in a market where financing is typical, plus the high price paid. Number 5, a number of the transactions were cash sales in a market where financing was typical, and the sales price for the properties appeared inordinately high. 1031, we'll get a little bit more in depth on these. We talked about them a little bit. This is a deferral again of capital gains tax, specific to income producing property. We verify this like any other sale. We do not just disqualify 1031s. This is not considered a trade. It has that word exchange in the title. That doesn't mean they are trading properties. Does not signify non-arm's length status. Again, verify the reinvestment time frame. If they were coming up towards the end of that reinvestment time frame, that might be an indication that they were acting with some undue pressure that they wouldn't be otherwise dealing with. Again, the contract for deed or land contract, this instrument provides for future delivery of a property deed after the contract conditions are met. Seller finances the purchase by permitting the buyer to pay for the property over the term of the contract. Title transfers after payments are complete. These are not valid sales. Sales confirmation summary. The deed is recorded with the clerk and recorder. Doc fee deeds are accompanied with a TD-1000. Clerk notes on deed if there is not a TD-1000. The TD-1000 is stamped with the date and reception number. That way, depending on your system, if all the clerk and recorder delivers to you is that TD-1000, maybe you have access digitally to the deeds that are recorded. You get that TD-1000, now you can find the deed and start to make sure that those elements, the grantor, grantee, consideration, date of purchase, all those things are copacetic. The deed is submitted to or retrieved by the assessor. Again, either your clerk and recorder brings it to you or you go get it from them. Then the assessor will transfer the ownership of the property. Input the sale into the computer, code, all non-doc fee sales. If no TD or incomplete TD 1000, send notification. If more data is required on the sale, send a notification. Through the TD 1000 analysis, you might be able to qualify or disqualify the sale, or you keep it qualified because you need further information before you can disqualify it. Sometimes the TD 1000 will blatantly indicate that this was related parties, brother sold it for a deal. Those are sales you can take that at their word and unqualify that. Again, if you have the time in your office to speak with the grantor, grantee, or both, that is ideal. Sales maps. Create sales maps, color code all sales by use, economic area, neighborhood, etc. List those sales prices in any manner. And you can use these for your physical inspections when you're out discovering your sales. Preliminary sales ratio analysis provides an indication of the general level of value, identifies potential outlier sales ratios, and potential problem areas in your market. Physical inspections, these are vital to determine condition at the time of sale. Potentially quality may have changed as well with remodels, additions. These are always necessary for outliers. HUDs, REOs, and short sales, send a supplemental questionnaire. Additional follow-up, personal visit with an interview, telephone interview, or the questionnaire if necessary. Final disqualification process. Based on physical inspection, renovations, remodels, additions, demolitions, continued analysis of return TD 1000 and or follow-up letters, supplemental letters for anomalies. Something might jump from the qualified to the unqualified after more information is submitted and discovered. Unverifiable sales that are extreme outliers cannot disqualify. You cannot disqualify them solely because of unverifiable status or they're an extreme outlier. So you might be searching long and hard to find out why you can unqualify this sale and never be able to unqualify it. Does that mean you have to use it when you're setting value? You have to consider it. That's what we do as appraisers. We consider the sales. If we haven't unqualified it because we don't have a reason, but we think something is funny about this sale, we can give it minimal weight in our consideration. One outlier out of 100, I would say that's justifiable. If your sample size is smaller, you might not have that kind of leniency. And again, extreme outliers may not be used to calibrate the valuation model, but must be returned for analysis. So you may or may not use them, but the auditor will look at that. You are now ready to begin time trend analysis. So we have another section. Section C is kind of your supplemental additional material, reference material. A lot of review from principles and procedures. We will go through some of this, just you have some fill in the blanks, but I will go quick. The biggest thing we're looking for here, you see this at the top of the page there. The appraiser must ascertain whether the property rights transferred, the permitted use, and the physical characteristics of the property on the date of assessment are the same as those on the date of sale. Does it equal? If not, then we need to think about that a little more, okay? History of land sales in the past, a clod of dirt, transferred property from seller to buyer in front of a witness. Just hand them some of the earth and that signified the transfer. Now we use deeds, both represent delivery of ownership. There's that slugger, the bundle of rights. We use the acronym slugger to help us remember sell or encumber, lease, use or occupy, give away or grant, enter or exit, or refuse all of the above. I can also, not only can I refuse to do any of those, I can refuse you to do any of those. Some of those it might make more sense for me to refuse than others, right? I can refuse you from coming onto my property. That is in my bundle. We do have limitations on the bundle of rights. Government limitations include police power, eminent domain, taxation, SG. We use the acronym government PEAT. Police power, eminent domain, taxation, SG. Private limitations, deed restrictions, CC&Rs. Easements, adverse possession, lease, lien, encroachment, reservation. For those private limitations, we use the acronym private dealer. So government PEAT and private dealer. Estates in real property. Fee simple. Fee simple is the most comprehensive form of ownership. So you see I have the full bundle of rights there with the fee simple. With a leased fee, the lease grants rights to the tenant. The leasehold is the tenant's right to occupy and use. So leased fee ownership, I have property in fee simple, I lease it to you. Now you have a leasehold, and that is your right to occupy. You see that from the bundle of rights, the leasehold got one little straw. The right to occupy and use. That may be an exaggeration, but you get the picture. A life estate is limited to the duration of one's life. When we appraise in Colorado, do we worry about leased fee, leasehold, life estates when we're appraising a property? We appraise the fee simple, full fee simple ownership. So again, just to revisit this concept, the transfer of ownership and acknowledgement of sale has to occur before we can confirm it. Any personnel dealing with sales confirmation must be familiar with how real estate is conveyed, the current market, and the sales confirmation procedures in your office. Ways to convey. Patents, when the government is the grantee. This would be an original transfer of property. You may see this, very unlikely. Voluntary alienation. Conveyance through deed. Again, this is the most common type of conveyance. This is where the owner voluntarily transfers the estate to another. Transfer by descent. Owner dies without a will. Transfer by will, estate distributed as wished. So what's the deal with that transfer by descent? That term escheat. The owner dies without a will. There are no living heirs that can be identified. Property reverts to the state. Unwilling transfer, adverse possession, continued possession, use, and claim. Foreclosure, again, when the owner defaults on the loan. Tax sale, you don't pay your note, you don't pay your taxes, rather. Eminent domain, the government says, we need this land for the betterment of the public. They acquire that through the process of condemnation. Eminent domain, again, is the power the government has to basically to take your property involuntarily. Condemnation is the process. Escheat, abandonment or death with no will, reverts to the state. The divorce decree, court can order a conveyance, so we're separating our assets. Court can order that one party pays the other, or vice versa. You get the house, they get the house. Finally, we have a few key terms at the end here. Market value, sales price, arm's length sale, outlier sales. I'm just going to leave you with those. If you want to refer back, you're wondering what those are again. If you do have any questions, please, you can voice them now. We'll just take maybe 20 minutes to talk about, look at these court cases and then discuss them as a group. So we have 5 court cases there, D1 through D5. So with BAA et al. V. Sonnenberg, the specifics of the case. I have the full drawn out case for all 5 of these if anybody cares to read. We've bullet pointed the important. points here. So the property is a 254-acre feedlot with a maximum capacity of 28,000 head of cattle. The assessor relied exclusively on the cost approach, citing a lack of sales and income information. The resulting value was $3.5 and change million. The CBOE lowered the value 5% to $3.4 million. Taxpayer was still unsatisfied, took it to the BAA. The taxpayer hired an expert who estimated the value using all three approaches to value: income, cost, and market, suggesting and reconciling to a value of $1.35 million. The discrepancy between the assessor's cost value estimate and the taxpayer's expert value estimate was due to the difference in estimated amount of depreciation. Very common in cost approach is getting that depreciation right. Two appraisers may not always get that the same. The market approach used an expanded market. So the taxpayer's expert that was hired used an expanded market area known as the High Plains feeding area. This includes Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Texas. They limited their search to comps that were within 200 miles of the subject. This was justified, as is pointed out by the justice writing the opinion, that the industry makes no distinction between county or state lines. The industry doesn't care. The High Plains feed market is not bound by a line that says this is Colorado, this is Nebraska. BAA affirmed the CBOE and the assessor in allowing only the cost approach to value. The owner appealed the BAA decision. District Court affirmed the BAA, and the owner appealed again. Court of Appeals reversed and remanded based on the board's failure to consider the market approach to value the feedlot. The BAA was granted writ of certiorari by the Supreme Court. Central question was whether the BAA abused their discretion by relying solely on the cost approach to valuation. The Colorado Supreme Court ruled that if evidence of comparable sales outside the county and within the relevant market is properly presented, such evidence must be given appropriate consideration. Assessors can and should consider comparable sales of property outside their county when sales volume is low. The sales should be within the subject's relevant market and may need to be adjusted. The court further ruled that the statute, which requires 30 comparable sales within a class or subclass to establish or utilize sales ratios, does not apply to valuation of individual properties for property tax purposes, but rather for statistical analyses only. Okay? Once the court makes this ruling, it becomes law. Right? It's not in the statute. It's not in the Constitution. This is their interpretation of such, and they've said, this is our ruling, now it's law, unless another court comes and overturns that. All right, so specifics of CP and Son. Petitioner appealed the value on 20 vacant residential lots in a Broomfield subdivision. They contended that the actual value of the subject property was $19,250 per lot. That was the price they paid for the property shortly before the valuation date. The assessor's value was $34,000 per lot, upheld by the CBOE. The district court, trier of fact, found that the value of the property was $34,000 per lot, except for 3 lots valued at $24,000, $26,000, and $27,000. Taxpayer appealed, claiming that the trial court erred in accepting the mass appraisal method to value the taxpayer's lots, in not using the taxpayer's purchase of property as an indication of value, and in finding that the unincurred costs of development were not deductible. Okay, that's a lot going on there. The Court of Appeals rejected the taxpayer's claims, offering that the mass appraisal method is acceptable, that valuing large areas of land on a parcel-by-parcel basis is impractical. The court was persuaded by the assessor that the taxpayer's purchase was not an indication of market value. The development was sold under duress. The court cited ample evidence in the trial court record to support the finding. As to allowable cost deductions, the Court of Appeals referenced the ARL guidelines and remanded the cause for additional findings on specific cost. The court referenced ARL sections regarding the use of mass appraisal and sales confirmation criteria and recognized that Colorado case law requires assessors to follow ARL guidelines. This was established in a different case, Huddleston. The Colorado Supreme Court said, based on the plain statutory language and constitutional requirement of uniformity, we conclude that the manuals are binding on the county assessors. This case supports the need for assessors to adequately document specific reasons used when excluding sales that were determined to be non-arm's length transactions. Moving along, Carrara up front, let's go through the specifics. Commercial property was valued at the statutory level of value as of the appraisal date. CRS provision required the 1983. So this is old. Things have changed since this case, but these are the particulars true to this case. Statute required the 1983 through 1986 assessed values be determined with reference to the 1977 base year. And the 77 level of value was in turn based on economic conditions as they existed in 76. The assessor did not consider depressed economic conditions taking place at the current level of value, 1985. The phrase base year time frame reflects the same concept as the phrase data gathering period. CBOE made minor revisions in value, but generally supported the assessor's value. BAA and district court affirmed. The taxpayers contended that the assessor erred in not accounting for the economic conditions that existed in the market at the time. They argued that the statutes surrounding the property valuation were unconstitutional, as they do not permit consideration of current economic conditions. They also claimed that the assessor's valuations and Arapahoe's CBOE's affirmation contained a number of substantive and procedural errors. The Colorado Supreme Court accepted certiorari. They found that the depressed economic conditions of 1985 could not be considered in light of the base year method, and that the assessor is required to consider economic conditions on the appraisal date. Not today, but the appraisal date. The court found that the base year assessment statute was not unconstitutional and acknowledged that legislators consider existing constitutional amendments and state statutes when framing and adopting new provisions. The court concluded that the board had the authority to weigh the testimony and evidence presented to it, and the record in this case included substantial evidence to support the board's decision. All right, you guys are fellows? So this was a few cases kind of jumbled together, if you will, talking about market value. Fellows v. Sugar Company in 1925 established the true value of taxable property is established using market value. The court began to define market value by offering the price the property would bring if offered by one who wished but was not obliged to sell, and purchased by one who wished but was not obliged to buy, the wishes of vendor and vendee being equally ardent. We talk a little differently now, but we're still kind of in the same place. And you'll see that May Stores versus Schumacher, market area must include comparable sales in the immediate vicinity of the subject when such sales are available. So now we're defining kind of market area. The court expanded the definition from our previous case, the definition of market value, by stating market value is the price that a willing buyer would pay a willing seller under normal economic conditions. Then we have BAA v. Denver, 91. The Colorado Constitution requires that property be assessed based on its actual value, and appropriate consideration must be given to all three approaches to value. Exclusion of any of the approaches must be explained. While this case did not expand on market value, it reinforced that actual value and market value are synonymous. Then we have HFSB versus Larimer County, Home Federal Savings Bank. The market approach considers what other comparable properties actually sold for in the marketplace at or about the date of which value is sought. This case referenced the ARL manuals reinforcing that binding effect on assessors. Each of these cases references the definition of market value for Colorado property tax. Although none is comprehensive, they each share components of the definition offered by the Appraisal Institute. That's the kind of current going definition we would use. Platinum Properties versus BAA. That was in the back row. Do you guys have a speaker? We'll go through the specifics. The taxpayer owns commercial property in Arapahoe County leased to Kmart. Property was valued at almost 3.4 million for 1983 based on one comparable sale and the income approach. Taxpayer asserted a value of around 1.5 million based on 5 comps in the area and appealed to the Arapahoe CBOE, which adjusted the value to 2.665. BAA further reduced the value to 2.4 and ruled that 4 of the petitioner's 5 sales were invalid. One sale was excluded on the grounds that it was contracted during but closed after the end of the data gathering period. The others occurred outside the county. District Court affirmed the BAA. The Court of Appeals reversed and remanded to the BAA for rehearing. So they said, no, you were wrong, BAA. You got to look at this case again. The Court of Appeals agreed with the taxpayer that sales contracts formally agreed to within the data collection period should be given consideration as comparable sales. The sale must have come to fruition under the terms and conditions of the original contract. The Court of Appeals also allowed for sales from outside the county, stating that the boundaries of the best appraisal vicinity will likely cross county lines, particularly in a metropolitan area.
Thank you for watching our presentation. We hope this format will benefit you in your work for ad valorem taxation. If you would like to provide any feedback or have any questions about the course, please contact the Colorado Division of Property Taxation.